Okay, Music 206. So this is my short video that is going to, first of all, explain how you can install mcGranulator and also on PC and Mac, and then kind of get into how to use the granulator as we've talked about in class. It's basically a reference for you for this assignment, which you need to use this for your for the Halloween soundscapes for class. Okay, so first of all, granular synthesis is a form of sound production that involves taking small fragments of audio files and playing them in rapid succession or simultaneously. These short audio files or samples are called grains. So, really important thing to remember about granular synthesis is that it works using the values of milliseconds as usual. So we've seen this before. So most of the values you see are going to be milliseconds in terms of timing. And I'll get into that in a minute. And obviously, as we've talked about, 1,000 milliseconds equals 1 second. So the most important parameters in granular synthesis are the grain length, which of course is how long each grain is in milliseconds. The grain rate, which is the rate at which the grains are sounding. How many times per second are we hearing a new sound? And then the last one is the grain transposition, which is the pitch and speed at which each grain is sounded, okay? So first to talk about installation here. As I talked about on Monday, I just wanted to cover this again, I talked about it on Wednesday. I just want to talk about this again and how to do this if you have a Mac or a PC. So first of all, if you have a Mac, when you first click on it, you're going to see this, right? Because you downloaded it off the internet, it's going to say that it's from an unidentified developer, right? And the problem with that, of course, is that it's not going to work. Now, you have to first try and launch it. And then when this dialog box pops up, then you can say, okay. But what you want to do is then go straight to the security and privacy settings on the computer, right? If you go up to the little apple in the corner top left and go to System Preferences, you can go to Security and Privacy. And then at the bottom, you'll see right down here, it says, it will show the program. It'll probably say mcGranulator was blocked from opening because it is not from an identified developer. So you're just going to say open anyways, okay? And from then on out, you can open the granulator on your machine and it'll work fine once you've basically allowed it to go. On a PC, it's a little different and it's not more complicated. You just have to first extract the program. So when you first download mcGranulator, it's going to be in a zip file, and you will have to click this extract all button here at the top, right? And once you do that, you end up with this folder that then has the .exe file in it, right? And remember, .exe files on a PC is an executable file. It's an application, okay? So on a PC, though, you're going to run the exact same problem where it's going to say, this: Windows is protecting your PC. Microsoft Defender is preventing this unrecognized app. Okay? So remember, what you need to do is click on this button here that says More Info. You click on the button that says More Info, and this will pop up. And then you click on the button down here that says Run Anyways. Okay? When you run it anyway, then you're basically bypassing this, and it, again, just like on the Mac, it will no longer pop up for you. Okay? So that's how you can run this on your computer. Now, just remember, you can also go into the MIDI lab and use it in there, right? It's going to work there. If you have the version that I gave you on Wednesday, then it's going to work in there no matter what. Please remember, in the MIDI lab, you do not have access to this, okay? So your problem is you will not be able to use it if you download it from the Google Drive in the MIDI lab. So you need to use the one I gave you. Now today I'm going to give you a new one because I fixed one of the little bugs in it. So if you want a newer version, that one works, but it's the one, the drag and drop wasn't working, and I fixed that. Okay. All right. So let's go on to the granulator and talk about the audio setup. Okay. Now you have to remember in these applications, I need to click on this button down here that says configure DSP. Okay. When I click on the configure DSP button, it pulls up this window. All right. And there are a couple important things that you need to do. So first of all, the inputs and outputs are right here. So you can see input and output. You're going to want probably whatever your computer speakers are, or headphones or whatever. And also really important is down here where it says scheduler in overdrive. Okay. I want to click on this button and click on audio interrupt. Okay. And what that's going to do, of course, is prioritize rhythm, and it's going to prioritize the granulator over any other things the computer is doing, and basically prevents the computer from, doing other things that are going to slow down the granulator or suddenly change its tempo because the computer's trying to process some other data. Okay. So anyway, so that is basically setting up the DSP, right? The digital driver. Okay. So in order to make this work now, what I first have to do is turn on the audio engine, okay? And I turn on the audio engine by clicking on this little button right here. So the audio engine is going to turn light blue, and that basically means it's now ready to actually make sound, right? If you don't click on that button, it just won't make any sound. It won't post any audio because the audio engine isn't on. And if you actually if you go back to configure DSP, you can now see also the CPU percentage, right? It's showing you the CPU percentage that is being used to make this granulator work. And if I turn this off, you can see it goes to 0. This is also an on and off switch here, but that's how I can see that it's running, okay? So as I said, I have solved this problem of the audio not posting in here, okay? So there are two methods for adding audio to the granulator. The first, as we did as a workaround on Wednesday, was to click on this button here that says library, right? And I can navigate now to any folder I want, including just the desktop. The desktop is a folder. So if I say desktop open, now in this little list here is going to post all of the files on my desktop, okay? Now, remember, everything on your desktop is going to post in here, which is, for instance, here's a PDF. That obviously is not going to work, right? A PDF is not going to post in the window. It's not an audio file. So, but I can click on anything that is an audio file itself. Here's an audio file, okay? And then it will post the audio file in the window, and you can see it in the window down here. The other method, of course, is just to drag and drop, okay? Oh, that's not downloaded. That's why that doesn't work. Let me grab this one. No, that not downloaded either. All right, so I need to drag. Man, I got to solve this problem with, yeah. Okay, so it does work. I just have, the problem is I have iCloud Drive turned on, and it's kind of making havoc with what is downloaded and what isn't. So anyway, so I can drag and drop audio files down here onto here, and now I'm ready to go. Okay. Now the first most important thing is the playhead. The playhead is accessible right here, right? This little slider, and wherever the playhead is where it's going to be granulating when I turn it on. Okay. Now, it's important to remember that if I start at the beginning where there's no sound, I'm not going to hear anything, right? And also remember, if I have an audio file that's really dynamic with some really quiet moments and some really loud moments, I am going to have to be careful about that, because if I'm on a silent spot and I crank the volume all the way up, well, when I go to a loud spot with more signal, I'm going to get a big spike in the volume, right? So I have to be careful about that. So I'm going to turn it on, and there are two ways of turning it on. First of all, I hit the on and off switch, right, which makes perfect sense, or I hit the space bar and it starts playing. So it is playing now. It's posting down here. If I crank the volume up, I might see a post here, right? So the signal's really quiet right now, and if I want to make it louder, I can turn up the volume down at the bottom, and I can also slide this into a louder moment. Okay, so that's kind of the two methods of choosing a moment in sound, right? So you can hear how dynamically the volume changes, right? Volume will change dramatically depending on where in the audio file I am. Now, another really important button is the mute button. If I hit the M key, or I hit the big M down at the bottom here, that is the mute button, and the mute button will turn things on and off, obviously. So it'll also just silence everything instantly. So M is your mute button, and it's really useful to use. So anyway, so let's get back to those three parameters that are the most important, right? The transposition, the grain length, the grain rate. Okay, so there are two. Well, there's two places to change the pitch of the granulation. The first one is up here. So if I just click on keyboard, it's going to allow me to actually play a keyboard and change the notes. Okay, so that's the transposition changing. I can also go down here to pitch variation and add variation. So listen to what happens when I crank this knob up. So every single grain is getting its own transposition, and it's going above and below the center frequency and creating quite a bit of havoc on the sound, right? Because every single grain is getting a different sound or different pitch. So if I leave that off, though, it'll stay on a single note. Now remember, if you're granulating noise, you're going to hear a noisy granulator synthesis, right? This happens to be a single sound, a single like note. And so that note is granulating in other notes, okay? So the other thing, the other two important parameters here are rate and length. If I crank up the rate, right now it's at 20 milliseconds, right? So of course that means there are 5 grains per second happening right now, right? Which is very fast. And that is the lowest rate that we can do in the granular synthesizer. That's the low end. Oh, I need to fix that. That should only go down to 20. It's actually not hard to fix. So I can just go over here and put minimum 20. Great. So anyway, so now the granulator is going to stop at 20. That's the lowest end of the rate. 25 per second is a lot, right? I don't even know the math, but if I do 5 per second, 5 times 60 is 300 samples per minute, right? Because we're getting 5 per second. Is that correct? Yes, that is. Wait, 20. Yeah, I think that's correct. I'm doing something wrong. I feel like that's not very many. Anyway, so it's important to be careful about how low this goes. It will use more CPU if you have a faster rate, okay? And you can hear the sound change as I go up in the rate. So listen to the rate. Right? And when I cross the threshold over 500, you'll start to hear gaps. Right? Because now the length is shorter than the rate. So there's a hole in the middle where I don't hear any sound, right? So if I turn this down, and similarly with length, length is the length of every individual sample, right? So right now it's set to 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. So if I turn this way down and then turn the rate up, I'm going to hear the same type of thing where it's faster, but I can get really fast, right? And now we have a really fast rate and length. Notice too, if I get the rate below at 15 milliseconds, it's almost not even pitched anymore, right? I don't really hear the pitch anymore of that sound. Okay? So then another thing to play around with is the start variation. That is going to vary where on the audio file it starts. If I turn this up, it's actually choosing a wider range. You can see the range up here. of where it's going to start on each grain. So it gives a nice variation in which it adds some variety to the sound. I have my standard panning here, and I can also add distortion. Okay. So anyway, so these are your most important parameters. And one other thing that's really useful is the R, okay? Anytime you see an R like this, it's gonna randomize those values. Okay? So if you really wanna create something sparse and empty or whatever, you can randomize all those values and they will just kind of spin around on their own, creating constant variation. Okay. So let me turn that off, turn these off. So then the other thing, of course, is adding reverb and delay. Okay. Reverb and delay are going to be really useful for creating a nice kind of blended sound. And then of course there's a dry knob too here for adding dryness to the mix so that I can still get distinctiveness. But listen to how much this changes the sound. If I change this here. Okay. So that pulsing you're hearing, first of all, at this level, is caused by the rate, right? The rate is 341 milliseconds. So it's causing this pulsing sound. If I want to get rid of that, if I turn this way down to like 50, okay? Remember too, there's also the glide switch here. Like glide is again in milliseconds, and it's going to glissando or slide between the notes instead of automatically going to the next one. Okay, which is a cool effect too. It's cool for making eerie Halloweeny sounds for sure. And then let me talk about one more thing, and then I'm going to talk about saving, and this will be done. So the last thing is that there are two different modes up here at the top. Three different modes really for playing the audio file itself. First of all, if I turn on cycle, what this is going to do, if I set this fast, you can see what's happening. It's basically pacing through the entire audio file, okay? And this can create some really cool effects. There's a rate slider up at the top, and if I turn this up, it's going to slow down, and you can literally make this go incredibly slow, and that's how we do the Justin Bieber at 800 times slower, for example. And you can create some beautiful big pads doing this, okay? So if you're trying to create a really cool big backing track or something for your project, you could so easily create that by having this pacer running and just go for it, okay? And you can see it also, it starts over again when it gets to the beginning, okay? So then the other method is random. And if I turn the random on, you can see what's going to happen. It's basically choosing a random moment in the audio file. And this will just kind of go like this while it's doing this. It's going to randomize constantly. And it's just choosing a random moment. Okay. So this can be really cool too for creating a kind of a washy sound that's continuous but always evolving. The rate here is going to change the speed. So if I turn this way up, this is in milliseconds. 999 is 1,000. So that's 1 per second basically. Or I can turn this down, right? So this is another method just for choosing basically the selection in the audio file, okay? Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is recording, right? How do I record the granulator? And we talked about this in class on Wednesday, but just to review. First of all, I have to hit the save button, okay? And remember, we hit save first. So before you want to record, you hit the save button to allocate a file location. So I'm going to go to the desktop just to use that and type in recording, okay? Recording 1. I say, okay. And notice here too, I have audio file types. Just choose AIF, that's totally fine. recording 1, save, okay? So I've allocated space on the desktop now to save my audio file. And if I want to record, all I have to do is unmute, or actually what I have to do is hit the record button, okay? It is now recording. Now, obviously my granulator is muted, so it's going to leave silence, and that's fine. I need to turn it on too. So right now it's muted, but as soon as I unmute, it's going to start recording the sound that's being made. But my recording is going to have a bunch of silence at the beginning because I've already started the recording process. So that's when I would go into Amadeus and chop that off, right? Okay, so I turn this on and I record this. Okay, and when I'm done, I'm gonna hit stop. I'm gonna let that sound die away completely. Okay, and then I'm gonna hit stop record. So, incredibly important, if you do not stop this recording process, it will not finish writing the file and it will not work, okay? So I have to stop, I have to complete the recording by stopping it to make it work. And so now I should have on my desktop an audio file called, what did I call it? Recording 1, here it is. And if I double click, it opens in Amadeus. And notice all this silence, right? All this silence was because it was muted. And so I can just now delete this and I'm good to go. Trim this up and I'm good, okay? Now, my recording was really quiet. And that's partly based on the audio file, right? My audio file doesn't have a huge amount of gain in it. So, you know, that's why. I probably should have turned this volume up too. I really recommend that you get as fat a recording without clipping as you can, right? So if I play again, you can see my meters down here are posting way bigger now because I cranked up the gain. I don't want to clip to hit the top, but I want it to be fuller. So I can go in here and change the gain. I'm going to go to amplify, sure, 7 dB. Maybe I'll even do that twice to get a nice fat recording, right? But it is better to record it live louder in Max or in the granulator, okay? Anyways, so that's it. And then I'm good to go. I have my audio recording and I'm ready to use it in Logic. Now, one thing to remember too is that adding reverb and delay sounds really good, and maybe you play around with these while you're working on your sound to create something interesting. But it's not a bad idea to turn them off when you record. And the reason is I can add reverb and delay in Logic, right? And I can then take those away or change them. If I record the reverb and delay in the granulator, I'm stuck with it no matter what, right? I can't take it out in Logic. So great. Anyways, I hope this works, and we will talk about this more in class today too. So I will see you then.